Well, ladies and gentlemen, all good things come to an end. This is the final session of our conference, and I promise you it will be again an interesting session. We have reports from two of the focus tracks. There were only two, so reports from all focus tracks. There will always also be a report on the progress we've made on the Amsterdam agenda. That was not a manifesto, it was an agenda that will be presented. And then we will have the presentation award. Who won the presentation for the early career scientists? And then finally, I'm going to explain the secret where the next conference will be. That will be the complete end of the conference. So, Maura Heine will report on the focus track on ensuring integrity and innovation and impact. She's from Ireland. You've seen her on the stage already. She has been involved in the writing committee of the European Code. She was the chair of that. But she is also working on impact and assessment of health research herself. So, Maura, the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much, and I would just first like to acknowledge that the idea for this focus track in the plenary that accompanied it was Paul Taylor's idea. And Daniel took up the baton and involved myself and Zoe Hammett in particular in getting this kind of work done. And I think we've been really glad that we went ahead with it. It's been really interesting, actually. Okay, so the question that we were trying to ask was, how can translational and other users trust our research evidence? And in doing so, what are the principles of research integrity that are captured, that they need to be looking at? So, are the principles captured in the Singapore Statement enough? So what we were trying to do through two focus tracks and a plenary session was to identify the principles that are most relevant to ensuring trust in the translation of research and innovation, which sounds like a very straightforward question. I can assure you it is not. And there were two really robust sets of conversations about this over 2 days. I think one thing that became very obvious is that there is a kind of a translational interface. When we talk about translation, we're not translating to one group. There's an interface with many, many different kinds of groups. So, I mean, obviously from the primary researchers, especially in the basic space, they are translating to applied researchers, for example. But there are also, there's the possibility of patients and the public actually interfacing at the translational stage, or even before in PPI. Obviously, policymakers and government will sort of interface with researchers when it comes to translation of evidence into policy and regulation and so on and so forth. And enterprise, and I've put in enterprise and industry here because I think enterprise can also be social enterprise. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody producing a product. But enterprise and industry will also, this will often be the first time that they will interface with the research process. Civil society does interface, but often that relationship sits further out, and they may not have a direct translational interface, but they might be interfacing with somebody who does. So if you're a patient looking for a drug, you will interface with the company, who interface with the researchers, and so on and so forth. But there is a flow of trust that needs to happen in all of these interactions. So the challenge really is then in the translational process, what do the many users who sit at that translational interface need in order to be able to trust the validity, the reliability, the robustness of the research evidence that they will either directly use or from which they will benefit? So, through the 2 days, I think, we didn't, this doesn't capture every single point that was made by everybody, but I was trying to just get at some of the key things. It became very apparent that there are different users on that pathway from kind of translation and innovation to impact, and they will often have very different vested, sometimes, interests, and they'll also have different conceptual frameworks from which they work. So that can actually cause some difficulties around the language and the way that we speak to each other. I think that everybody agreed that we need to be very clear and very transparent about who is setting the priorities for the research and its translation. What are those priorities and why are those particular priorities being set? So we need to be very transparent. We also, and I thought this was something I hadn't thought a great deal about before, we need to encourage researchers through our publications and perhaps through our funding mechanisms to really fully explore and articulate the limitations of their research. So when you read about stuff in the paper, there are often very positive claims being made about research. But what they're not saying is, well, actually it's a little bit more nuanced than this, and in social media as well. And so we need to allow researchers that space to be able to explain the pros and cons of the research, what it can do, what it cannot do. I think user engagement and user involvement, it's been mentioned many, many times through this conference, really, really important with helping to understand, but also to manage expectations about what the research can and cannot do. And Charlie Day made a very strong plea for good governance, that of the research, of the translation process, of those relationships that sit at the translational interface. Good governance is a really, really vital component of translation and therefore of trust. So, what did we conclude? Well, we concluded that the principles of the Singapore Statement are all incredibly valid. There aren't any of them that aren't important. But when it comes to ensuring trust around that translational interface and in the implementation and uptake of that research, we are proposing that there are actually two additional principles that need to be considered. The first is transparency. So transparency in the research process and in the presentation of results. And you're kind of going, yeah, but is that not already picked up in the Singapore Statement? It's not explicitly picked up, but it is picked up in newer codes of conduct, such as the European Code of Conduct, the Dutch Code of Conduct, and so on and so forth. So I think it's an incredibly important principle. Sorry, there's something weird going on here. Incredibly important principle that we need to capture and be explicit about. The second one, and this is around the fact that we have so many different actors in the system, it's around clarity of communication. We want to ensure that the information that we communicate about innovation, about the evidence that we have produced, is understandable, is explainable, and is accessible to the other actors. That could be other researchers in different disciplines, by the way. We're not talking necessarily here about civil society, but I think as a research community, we really have to take responsibility for this, and the Brussels Declaration was trying to articulate some of that. So what happens next? Well, this is only the start of something. It's an iterative process, obviously, because we need to figure out how we might go about implementing the principles and the kind of the values that people have put on those principles and really making them obvious to people so that they can trust the research. We need to better understand what principles different actors in the system really value, because they may be different. So governments might value particular principles, patients and the public might value something different, industry might value something different. So we actually have to go out and talk to people and find out what is it that they value, why do they value that, and then how might we be able to build that into producing evidence that they can actually trust. And ultimately, we really would like to see an acceptance of the expansion of the principles that are in the Singapore Statement to include the new principles of transparency and clarity of communication so that we can underpin the full research process, and especially the research that's happening at that kind of translational interface and hopefully out into good impact. So, Daniel, do you have anything to add? No? Okay. So that's the first one. Okay.
Thank you, Maura, for this really clear explanation of what happened in this closed room with all these people inside. And really practical. We have to think about it, but it sounds wonderful. The next speaker is Klaas Seidsma. As I told you already before, Klaas will report on what we labeled in Amsterdam to be the Registry for Research on the Responsible Conduct of Research. And you might remember that you were all nudged on the abstract submission form to declare whether you pre-registered your study. And if you did, you could tick a box and explain what it was. Klaas is from now on our ambassador of the registry and also an ambassador of science. He forgot his yellow t-shirt, but we will allow that. That's not a big problem. He will now report and nudge you into being a little bit more compliant in using our new register, because we need to practice what we preach, of course. Klaas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lex, for introducing me. My name is Klaas Seidsma. I'm from Tilburg University in the Netherlands. And I noticed with several lectures at this conference that people have a tendency to first tell the audience a little bit about themselves, to show their credentials, so to speak. Well, I'm a professor of applied statistics. I've done many administrative jobs, and as an administrator, I was involved in a couple of integrity scandals. So those are my credentials. Based on that, you should trust me, I think. Why pre-registration? Let's first have a look at weather forecasting. Predicting yesterday's weather is no big deal. When I used to look at the weather report in the early days together with my father, he would be very irritated about the weather report. He was a sailor, by the way, second in command on a big freighter. And so he had to know professionally a lot about the weather, and he got irritated saying things like, you know, we know what weather it was today, we all got soaking wet. So now tell us what the weather will be tomorrow. And I don't know if he gave it a lot of thought, but actually you can learn a lot from studying the weather of today and the previous period. For example, by looking for patterns that repeat and the conditions that the repetitions share. And based on that, actually following an inductive process, this may actually give rise to theories about weather systems. And from these theories you can deduce hypotheses and empirically test the hypotheses, and the aim, of course, is to improve predicting tomorrow's weather. And this is a deductive process. Okay, we're all here at a conference to learn a little bit, so now some philosophy. Hans Reichenbach was an empiricist philosopher who lived in the first half of the 20th century. I don't know a lot about him, but I know he distinguished the context of discovery from the context of justification. And the context of discovery refers to the psychological thought processes as they actually occur in scientific discovery or inference. For example, the way existing data, we have to think of existing data, and they may actually be anything, even your intuition, enable a meteorologist to infer a theory about weather systems, or a health researcher to discover relations between important variables. And the context of justification is something different. That context refers to the logical analysis of the truth of the knowledge discovered, and it involves scientific procedures for establishing the validity of a prediction. Concretely, the correctness of the prediction of the weather in the next 10 days, or the resilience of the hypothesis when faced with newly collected data about a particular health problem. I'm mentioning this because quite recently Nosek and a few colleagues published a paper called The Pre-Registration Revolution. And they make a distinction between post-diction and prediction that actually corresponds to the distinction I just mentioned. Post-diction refers to generating new ideas, and mind you, based on existing data. So exploring patterns that support an idea or generate a new idea. And the exploration is meant to generate hypotheses. Prediction, on the other hand, involves testing hypotheses inspired by existing data, by existing data in newly collected data. using either a frequentist approach or a Bayesian approach. You see, I'm a statistician. I simply have to mention these things. You have to notice one thing. Data, as we use them in the social and behavioral sciences and the health sciences and in medicine, are very noisy, meaning they contain an awful lot of rubbish. I formulated that a little bit differently. They contain many unexpected and unrepeatable signals. And exploration finds those signals and takes them seriously. And there is a very famous paper by John Ioannidis that you probably heard of, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. And that paper refers exactly to this phenomenon, right? Okay, pre-registering your research, committing yourself to an a priori plan, limits your possibilities to present results as if you predicted them when you actually found them by exploring your old data. And I think there are two goals with pre-registration. The first is self-protection. I don't know who of you regularly analyzes data, but the temptation to play with your data simply is irresistible. I mean, I myself am guilty of that, guilty as charged, and so are you, I guess. It's irresistible not to look around the corner and see what happens if you change this or do that. So you have to protect yourself and to publish results for what they are, and the context must be made explicit. Is it discovery or justification? I had another example that I think I will skip because otherwise I will take too much time. The Amsterdam Agenda, what was it? It was meant to establish a registry for research on the responsible conduct of research, RRRCR, a nasty abbreviation. I think we have to think of something else. The registration should at least, if you register, you should at least take care of 6 key elements that are outlined in the Amsterdam Agenda. You have to say something about the problem, the shortcomings you are addressing, the impact of the shortcomings on trustworthy research, the trustworthiness of the research, and intervention, how do you plan to address the identified shortcomings, a hypothesis or anticipated outcomes, assessment, how do you plan to test your hypothesis, and data sharing. And after registration, upload a full study protocol, a data analysis plan, a data set, and reports describing results. So mentioning all of this because it involves quite some administration, and I will get to that later on. What are we going to do? I will provide you with feedback on the degree to which the Amsterdam Agenda resonated among researchers, that is, among you guys, right? So this will be a confrontation. Sit back and enjoy the show. I got the data from 2 Excel files I got from the organizers of this conference, dated 24th of April, so they're probably not final, but I think they are pretty representative of what has been happening at this conference. I identified 9 variables I could use. 6 I identified as independent variables. Okay. Presentation mode, whether you're an early career scholar, the topic of your paper or poster, your category of research, qualitative, quantitative, or descriptive, the continent you live on, and the discipline in which you have your job. And there are 3 dependent variables, whether you pre-registered or not, if you did, which registry you used, and the completeness of the registration. So that's what we're going to look at. Now, Lex warned me not to show too many tables, so I skipped an awful lot. And you only have to look at the red numbers, and they are quite revealing. We have 308 posters and presentations, papers and posters. 250 were not pre-registered, and 58 were. So that's 90%, a little under 1/5. Okay, let this sink in, right? We go on. The conclusions, I'm skipping the rest of the table. So 19% of you guys pre-registered, and that means 81%, if I'm correct, didn't. Of the 58 participants who pre-registered, 56 provided information about the registry and completeness of pre-registration. And of them, 41 used either RRRCR or OSF. Basically the same thing, right? And 21 provided information on at least one of the entries, one of the 6 entries of the Amsterdam agenda, and 14 provided information of 5 to 6 entries, so they were more or less complete. And then 24 provided URLs requiring me to sign in using a username and password I didn't have, of course, because you had them, or led me to another irrelevant site, such as a general statement of a university about research integrity. But that is different, of course, from registration. So I think it's pretty clear. We have some homework to do for the next conference. Everybody pre-register, I guess. Okay, here's another table, and then I'm done. There are a few things I thought that were interesting enough to tell here. There are three, we distinguish 3 categories of research, qualitative and quantitative, and as you can see, the red numbers are percentages, and there are no differences between these 2 categories of researchers with respect to pre-registration. So they are equally loyal or disloyal, if you like, to pre-registration. And then there was something funny. People who are involved in ethics and integrity hardly pre-register. I thought I have to do something to protect those poor souls. So I did some extra analyses, and it turned out that many of these people actually fall into the category of descriptive research. So you have to think of review papers, opinion papers, case studies, and so on and so on. Right. Main conclusions. 19% pre-registration may look modest, but hey guys, it's a start, isn't it? Similar results were found. If you go through the literature, you'll find percentages like this. For example, for clinical trials, in a paper by Ioannidis, Kaplan, and Del Rey, there are other problems with pre-registration, for example, in psychological science, an important journal in the area of psychology. So we're not alone. Everybody is trying to make a start. Pre-registration involves a working routine completely different from what we are used to, right? It takes discipline and time. So perhaps we need training, and perhaps we should consider it a job requirement in the future, right? Pre-registration must become routine in academic education. So I'm now thinking of students. You know, the big advantages, and I see that at Tilburg University, where students learn this routinely, is they pick it up easily. They pick up everything easily, and that is because they don't have a routine they first have to shake off, like everybody over 30 years, right? To be honest, I found the 6 key elements outlined in the Amsterdam agenda not unambiguous. And I had a pretty difficult time defining them for my own study. So perhaps we have to pay some attention to that as well. And we need to improve ourselves for the next conference. I would say 100% pre-registration may be too optimistic, but let's say high in the 90s should be possible. Thank you very much.
Wow. This is something for the next conference. Maybe we should make it mandatory with a small opt-out clause. We have to think about it. Next come 2 gentlemen. The gentleman who conducted the sessions, the focus tracks on the Hong Kong Manifesto, which is now called Principle, but maybe it changed overnight. You never know. David Mower and Paul Glazier will share this slot. And many of you will know them as people who have been important for decades in improving clinical research, and they're still going strong. And today they will present what happened to the Hong Kong Manifesto when it became principles and what will happen next. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lex. So just to follow up from the previous presenter, if we actually mandated registration as part of career assessment, we might get close to 100%. So Paul and I are here representing a much larger group, and in some ways we are trying to change the world. But what we are going to share with you is the Hong Kong Manifesto. Approximately 13 months ago, Paul and I submitted the application to the 6th World Conference, and that was about sort of how can we improve the assessment for researchers in their careers. The goal of developing the Hong Kong Manifesto was to provide guidance for those completing the assessments, principally promotion and tenure committees. We did initially concentrate on universities where the researchers are learning their careers or where they are established with their careers. But clearly they're simply one stakeholder and there's other stakeholders and players involved. Implementation was meant to be a very key part of the Hong Kong Manifesto, so there's no point in sort of saying we'd like to do A, B, and C, because many vice presidents of research are going to ask us, how can we implement it and how can we do it with keeping a barrier quite low? And also, we wanted to be able to evaluate any implementation strategies that we were thinking about. So we wrote a first draft of the Hong Kong Manifesto. At least some of us wrote it, and others are joining us, which is wonderful. We put the first version on the conference website in early May. We received about 50 pages of feedback, so thank you to everybody who participated. And we put the second version on the conference website in late May. And these were the principles that we came with. And what happened then is that we had a plenary presentation. We had 2 focus track sessions. The first one was we had breakout sessions where we discussed each principle was discussed by a separate group, and we had wonderful facilitators. And I want to just initially mention Jeannie Barber because she's the chair of the International Advisory Group for DORA, so she will be a liaise for us to liaise with DORA. We had really very active engagement from literally hundreds of people, so thank you to everybody. That's something really very positive. I think I want to skip this and pass the baton to Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, David. And I was just going to show this one for the sake of transparency. This is some of the data that we collected during the focus group, the usual sort of academic scribbles. David's going to post that on GitHub as soon as he learns how to work GitHub. I'd like to thank all of the people in the focus track. I came to this conference specifically to learn things that would help in this sort of process, and actually the examples and feedback that we got during both the small group breakout sessions and also the groups coming together on the second day was extremely helpful. Of course, if you put a sentence before a large group of academics, they're going to fiddle with that sentence for a long time. I think the sentences are actually better for doing that though, and so the red shows some of the additions. I haven't shown all of the deletions, so the editing was actually quite extensive. But I think we've come out with a better set of principles, and given that this is what people will read most, actually that wording is really important. But the second thing that will be really important, and I'm just going to show you a snapshot of a few of those, is a set of examples to illustrate how you might implement the principles or how funders and research institutions might support them. I'm not going to go through all the principles, and I apologise that I won't show all of the wonderful examples that we collected. But for example, Principle 2 was to value the accurate and transparent reporting of all research regardless of the results. Wellcome have a very nice process now for supporting this and getting close to mandating it. The little box you'll see highlighted in pink there says specifically all articles in the Wellcome Open Research that report clinical trials must adhere to the consort reporting guidelines. we ask authors to include a copy of the original trial protocol and a complete consort checklist and flow diagram as supporting files. So that helps with the transparency, not just for the publication, but providing the protocol as well, and in a way that's consort compliant. Of course, lots of other funders, we've got lots of other examples, NC3R, NIHR, and lots of other funders have similar requirements in their statements, but this is one of the strongest pieces of support. Principle 3, value the practices of open science, such as open methods, materials and data. And again, I'm showing you the same process here, but a different part of it. This is the publication process here, where the article is submitted prior to peer review. It's put up in a preprint server with the data as well, the data deposition. So it's not only helping with the preprint process and the later peer review process that it goes through, but also with a data deposition leading to the open science processes and eventually an open access full peer-reviewed publication. And this has been reasonably well adopted, with 320 articles so far being processed. Principle 5, value a range of other contributions to responsible research and scholarly activity, such as peer review for grants and publications, mentoring, outreach and knowledge transfer. So most of the principles are actually about the process of research itself, the individual pieces of research that a researcher does. Whereas this last principle is about the things that researchers do to help the whole research ecosystem, their students, their institution, the funders, etc., all of those processes. And again, this usually doesn't get much value in CVs for promotion, tenure decisions, or for track records in grant decisions. Again, I think there are lots of nice examples developing of this. One of the examples we were given was the Finnish National Board of Research Integrity's template for researchers. And this is point number 12, scientific and societal impact of research, which asks about publications and impact. Okay, the usual sorts of things, but it also asks about the distribution of results, application of the results, and the scientific communication, which is part of that knowledge transfer and outreach processes. And there are other parts about the mentoring in their template as well. Some examples, of course, actually range across a couple of the principles. To show you one, there's a poster up here about the Delft Data Champions process, which built on the work that had been done at the University of Cambridge. And the idea of the Data Champions was people within the institution who would help with the process, help other researchers with how they go about the sorts of registration, placing data, etc. processes. And there's data champions for different disciplines, because the processes will be different for different disciplines, clearly. Not just the type of data that you're dealing with, but also what are the resources that you might use for that. And this is not yet used in tenure and promotion decisions, as I understand it, but in the Delft one there is a suggestion that it will soon be includable in your CV for promotion. That is, if you've been one of these data champions, there are some rewards, but it'll also go into your promotion decisions as well, which I think is an important step forward. I could go on for the rest of the afternoon, but Lex won't let me. Giving you good examples of this. We would like more of these, and what we're looking at as the next steps is to work up the examples that we have currently. But if you have other examples that you feel were left out, please send them into David. That's his email address there. You'll notice I haven't put mine up. Second is we'll be doing a revised wording with the principles, text and examples, and plan to complete that task within the next few weeks. And we will again repost that on the website. It's been up there twice, as David told you earlier. We will then collect further feedback on that, and then plan to have a final revision with the accompanying explanatory document. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is really clear. And please don't forget this final round of comments. It's really an opportunity to improve it. After that, we will publish it, implement it as good as possible, and come back in it on the next conference. So now, Sonia, what about you? This is time to make known who will be the winner of the presentation award. Sonia likes suspense, so that's the reason she picked the longest stretch to walk to the stage. It's really amazing, Sonia. Floor is yours.
So thank you. We have 5 winners here. I will announce the names, the first one, and then the other second prize winners. And I'd like you please stand up after I tell your name. So the first prize goes to the excellent oral presentation made by Natalie Pierce-Dussert from London, whose title is Use and Impact of the Arrive Guidelines, a survey of in vivo researchers worldwide. Please stand up, Natalie. There are no certificates today, so I'll announce the second one and then the others, and I will ask you please stand up. And then at the end of the announcement, I would invite you just to come here, come to stage please, so that everybody can see you, and then you applaud again, and then we'll go to the next point, because I think that everybody is excited about the next host of the conference. So the second one is Michel de Boer from Amsterdam, and the work is Why We Still Use No Hypothesis Significance Testing in Empirical Research. Please stand up. And another second is Che McClaskey from Michigan State University, East Lansing, and the title is The Humanities Virtues Project, Bringing a Virtual-Based Approach to Responsible Conduct of Research Training to the Humanities. Please stand up. He's not here. Next, Rachel Douglas Jones from IT University of Copenhagen for the work Practicing the Danish Code of Conduct for Research Integrity. Where are you, Rachel? And then Alexander Punchin from the Institute for Information Transmission Problems of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Moscow, for the work Concealed Homeopathy, a Natural Test of Peer Review Quality. So congratulations, and I please invite you to come here, just for everybody to see you. Please come to stage.
I cannot let these people wait longer. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to explain to you the answer to the question I have been asked maybe 200 times over the last few days. And we decided, after thinking about it and debating about it and contemplating it for the whole Saturday before the conference, where the next conference should be. And it is Cape Town, South Africa. Video, please.
Thank you, Danki, enkosi kakhulu. On behalf of UCT and our African partners, I'd like to express gratitude to the World Conferences on Research Integrity Foundation for selecting Cape Town as the host city for the 7th WCRI in 2021. We are humbled by your choice and honored that you have put your trust in us to deliver an exciting and exceptional conference. We will strive in every way to bring you an excellent program with offerings that are attractive to an African and international audience. UCT is an inclusive and engaged research-intensive African university that inspires creativity through outstanding achievements in learning, discovery, and citizenship, advancing a more equitable and sustainable social order and influencing the global higher education landscape. We are a leading university on the African continent and one of the first to establish an Office of Research Integrity. Hosting the 7th WCRI in Africa will help in raising awareness about research integrity and elicit commitment from African players to institutionalize it, put it on the African research agenda, and position Africa as an important contributor to the global research integrity agenda. Cape Town has plenty to offer visitors, and we are confident that it is a destination that you will be excited to visit. We look forward to welcoming you to Cape Town in 2021.
Well, this makes the parting a little bit easy, doesn't it? I'm sure that you all agree that we have a nice and inspiring conference together, at least I thought so, but there may still be room for improvement. So we send around these evaluation forms. Please answer them. We really want to use your inputs to improve it further. So put your suggestions on the forms, and we will really look at them and try to improve the conference even further in Cape Town. Now, I'd like to thank you all, the chairs, the keynote speakers, the moderators, the people who did the workshops, the oral presentations, the poster pitches, what have you, everyone who asked questions, so basically all of you. But when everything goes smoothly in the conference, you know there is a dedicated team behind it that make it happen. And there they are. Maybe a round of applause for them. No, Kate. On the stage, on the stage. one of that team is a little bit more special than the others. And here she is. This is the Kate Yip that all made it possible. Really. There she is. Thank you, thank you. Great. Now this is really the end. Safe travels home, and let's meet us all again back in Cape Town in 2 years' time. But most of you will be see each other before that. Good journeys, safe travels, and until Cape Town. There we go.